Beginning in 1985, I lost my first friend to AIDS. And by 1990, I had been to 20 or so funerals of friends who had died of the AIDS virus. And one of those friends was Art Peterson. Art and I were best friends. We were hired at the newspaper the same day, went through the same training classes. Our desks were right next to each other, so we had a very good relationship. It was a non-sexual relationship, but we were best friends. My boss was a tyrant. And so by means of trying to exceed expectations, I was spending, 12, 13 hours a day at the newspaper. I would go to church on Sunday, and as soon as the service was over, I would get in my car and drive to the newspaper and work several more hours on whatever I felt I could do to please the vice president. My relationship with Jack was disintegrating. I would see mom and dad maybe every 4 or 5 months, and we only lived an hour and a half apart. But then my friend Art became very ill, and he had to take a medical leave of absence, and he went home. And the one thing that I thought that I was doing, that I took some pride in was I was making a point to go and see him about every other day. But the whole time that I was there, I bitched. And after a while, Art finally just said to me, enough is enough. I'm tired of your bitching and complaining. All you do is, I'm laying here sick as a dog, and all you can do is talk about how miserable you are. That went on, the next time I would go and visit, I would try to be more positive, and I wouldn't mention Kathy Coffee, or I wouldn't mention the newspaper, but eventually it would all come back. We could communicate in signing, but even with that, he, when he got agitated, he would, do the, I won't do it on camera, the finger thing, and that let me know it was time for me to leave. And then one afternoon I went by to see him, and he had already prepared it. He had written out this long letter to me that I had to read. And it basically said, I don't want you ever to come back until you've left the newspaper, because you are wasting your life. You are miserable. You're making Jack miserable. Your parents don't know you anymore. You're making me miserable. I'm dying. I have maybe 2 or 3 months left. And you have your whole life ahead of you, and yet all you can do is stay at that newspaper. You think that they owe you, or you owe them something, I don't know what. But he basically said, until you leave the paper, I don't ever want to see you again, because you're not helping me. You're making me worse. Andrea, I'll never forget the look on his face. Never, ever, never forget it. And so I put the letter down and I walked out. But the last thing he wrote in that letter was, I want you to go to church on Sunday, and I want you to pray to God that He relieves you of this job. And I want you to listen to what He says to you, because you've got something better to do than stay at that newspaper and waste your life. And so on Sunday, I did just that. I don't remember ever praying as hard as I did that day for some sign, I wasn't expecting the voice of God to come booming through the rafters or anything like that. But I don't remember ever praying as hard as I did that day for some kind of a message of what I'm supposed to do with my life. I don't remember the music. I don't remember confessing my sins. I went through it just, I memorized it. I went through it rotely, whatever. But then Pastor Joanne Post stood up to preach. She was our associate pastor, and she was one of the first women ever ordained in the Lutheran Church. She talked about how tough it was. But it was the fact that she had faith in God that she was doing the right thing that got her through it. And that's when I remembered listening to her sermon. And I remember that day I was not in the choir. I don't know why I felt like I should not sing in the choir that day, but I sat in the congregation, and I was right in front of the pulpit. And it was almost like she was talking to me alone. I didn't go to the newspaper that afternoon. First time I didn't go to the newspaper on Sunday in probably 3 months. But I was mostly concentrating on Joanne's sermon. So that night, Jack said, "What's going on with you?" And I told him about Art's letter. He said, I knew something had to do with Art. But it was Joanne's sermon and the fact that Art had said, "I'm dying, get on with your life." That was God's way of kicking me in the ass and saying, "Get on with it." So that was the genesis of my calling, if you will. After I went through several, had to go through the interviews with the pastors, had to go through an interview with the church council, had an interview with the bishop to be approved just to apply. And once they all said yes, and I could apply, then I went back to see Art. And when I did, I said, "This is what I'm going to do. This is what I think I'm being called to do that." And he said, "Good." Good, happy. After, Jackie and I had our moment of happiness and tears and so forth and so on, he said, "You've got to call Art." So I called the house. This was 7 o'clock that evening. I had got home from work, found the letter in the mailbox. And Beverly said, "Come now. Get here quick." And I walked in with the letter, and I sat down. Art was still with us. He was conscious. All he could do now was squeeze your hand. He couldn't do any sign language. He couldn't write. He would squeeze your hand, and he would squeeze it once for yes, twice for no. And so I said, "I've got something to read you." And I read the letter. And when I got to the line, "You have been accepted," he just, he held onto my hand so tight. I don't know where he got the energy, where he got the strength, but it was just white knuckles. That's how hard he was holding my hand. When I finished reading the letter, he did this, which meant I want a cigarette. And so I lit a cigarette. We weren't able to smoke in the house for a long time because he was on oxygen. But the doctor said, he doesn't have long. Let's make him comfortable. And the first thing he wanted was a cigarette. And so the oxygen went out the door, and and so I lit a cigarette for us, and we shared it. And we just sat there quietly for I don't know, I can't remember, no telling how long. And I called Jack, and I told him that, I'd made it, and Art was still with us. And he said, I said, "I'm going to stay here for a while." He said, "Stay as long as you want." And 3 hours later, he was gone. We buried him in his Peterson sweatshirt. It was a coat of arms. It was his favorite sweatshirt. And it was Peterson coat of arms. And he has a pack of Camel lights in his pocket, in the breast pocket, and he has 2 joints in the other breast pocket of his jacket. And there's a copy of my acceptance letter tucked into that jacket as well. By this time, everybody at the newspaper knew that what I was about to do, and after the service, several of our newspaper colleagues came up to me and said, "Now we know why you're doing what you're doing. We never realized it until now, but you're doing the right thing. This is what you were called to do." Whenever I got into an issue at the seminary where classes were difficult, assignments seemingly beyond my comprehension, I thought about art. And except for proving the straight naysayers wrong, I wanted to prove art right.